So how can you use Puppet Warp to distort a texture? Well, it has to do with fencing things off. Let's go ahead and Alt double click this background layer to unlock it. This is just some fall foliage from the Pixabay website, which is copyright free images. I'm going to convert this to a smart object. And now I can freely use the Puppet Warp without fear of horrible things occurring. So I'm going to go to Edit, Puppet Warp. And here we have the Puppet Warp. Now for this to work well, I'm going to set the expansion to 0 pixels. And I'm going to increase the density to more points. So we get a lot of points to work with. I'm going to turn off Show Mesh. So I also need to zoom in so we can actually take a look at this. If I were to just click on this, hold down Alt, and rotate, nothing would occur because there's only one pin. If I were to add a second pin and then rotate, you can see how it's squishing things together. See how this is getting smashed? So we do have the ability to kind of squish things, but we can also, let me revert that, we can also fence stuff in. Remember earlier I said that the pins can work as a way to distort or to hold things in place. So what if you did a whole bunch of pins and just sort of fenced off an area? And I went a little too close, so got mad. Fence off an area, and then grab a pin and move things around. Notice there's not as much distortion going on outside. And if we were to Alt drag, we can warp it without too much of a warp effect occurring outside of it. So what if we fence it off even further with just a ludicrous number of pins? Now be careful. If you have an older machine, too many pins will cause the system to slow down. I moved that pin a little bit. I don't want to do that. Now what happens? Extremely little distortion. Well, we can take this even further. We've got this fence of pins. We can also pin the edges. Like so. Now this is a ludicrous amount. Generally, you'll be working in a much smaller area, so you won't need this many pins. And now I can warp it with practically no distortion effects occurring on the rest of the image. Just the one I accidentally created when I pulled this pin in. Because of this, I'm able to do things like correct twists or wiggles that may occur inside of an image. So the Puppet Warp's a great way to actually unwarp things as well. You just have to be a little diligent with how you pin things around to hold it in place so that you don't do transformations that you might regret. Also, smaller transformations can be more useful with the Puppet Warp than a large one. Like a small warp up or down, you can see that I can do quite a large field. And if I do a big one, it will be a little over distorted and could cause bad effects over here. You could go in and try to adjust it. At that point, you may want to change the mode to something a little more rigid, which will help hold things in place. I'm going to Alt click to get rid of a few of these excess pins. Now that I'm on rigid, notice that there's practically no changes going on past the fence that I created. Whereas if I were to do something like distort, you can see there's quite a bit of warping occurring outside of the fence. So rigid can also be your friend. Now for fun, let's go ahead and set it back to rigid and then set it from more points to fewer points. Notice that it will remove excess pins and I may not be able to edit as well at all. So do be careful. There's no going back. I can switch it from fewer points to back to more points, but those pins that I painstakingly placed are gone. So watch out for that one. Let me clear out all of these pins. All right, now that the pins are gone, let's just try it with fewer points to start with. And let's go ahead and show the mesh. So now that I can see the mesh, I can do a little fencing by just clicking once inside of each of these triangles far enough away that they will function. So notice on rigid, with fewer points, it's not particularly successful because there's just too much is being adjusted in one go. But on distort, with fewer points, you're going to get a crazy huge effect on everything. So that's why you want to use this with more points. You can try it with normal if you're in a hurry, but honestly, more points is the way to go. And you're going to want it not to be in distort. You're going to want it to be on rigid when you're doing these kinds of adjustments. You can see that on normal, there's still not enough. More points is really the best approach. And what you'll want to do, again, just one last time, so that you've got this nailed in, set it up with rigid, set it up with more points, 0 expansion, go to the edges of whatever you're going to be distorting and pin them all down so that they won't try to peel away from the edge. Now, if you're using a mask, you probably won't have to worry about that as much because the mask will hide a lot of the distortion. And if you're on a laptop, you may not be able to use quite as many pins because your laptop will slow down. The processor will really not be happy. And then draw, I missed. Let me alt click. You have to be a little careful when clicking so that you don't move the mouse around and accidentally distort. So I'm just going to come in here and fence it off. Now, I don't think I'll need an inner fence. I think that will be sufficient. And look, I can do a twist. Now there's still a little bit of distortion, so let's put in an inner fence. All right. Oops. Alt key. And look at that. That allows me to wiggle this leaf around. Let me hide the mesh. With practically no maladjustments occurring outside of it. Oops. So I can do little wiggles. You can see a little bit of adjustments happening, so do watch out for that. And that's how essentially you do adjustments to a texture using the Puppet Warp effect. All right. If you have any questions on this, because you may end up in a stickier situation on this assignment, do let me know, and I'll be happy to talk about it. If you provide a file, I can show you a good way to adjust it right away. Let's move on to our next set of tools.